Our first night in this haunted house went terribly wrong. Real horror story. From the outside, the house looked harmless, just another rental on a quiet, forgotten road. But the moment they stepped inside, the air felt wrong, pulsing like something alive had been waiting. Shadows clung too tightly to corners, and the walls breathed with a slow, heavy rhythm. Their first night was supposed to be peaceful, a fresh start. Instead, the house revealed its secrets, and nothing that happened afterward could ever be explained. The house had stood vacant for years, left to sag beneath its own weight as the forest crept closer each season. When they arrived, the trees seemed to lean toward the structure, their branches reaching like curious fingers. It was the kind of place that inspired caution in anyone who looked too long, yet something about it felt like an invitation, silent, patient, and chilled with an unnatural stillness. The air around the front door carried a faint scent of damp earth, as though the home had been buried and unearthed many times. Inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. A dense heaviness pressed against their skin, thick like invisible fog. Every step stirred dust that floated too slowly, as if time lagged around them. The floorboards bowed gently beneath their weight, giving the impression that the house was adjusting to their presence, testing, measuring. Light from outside seemed to dim once it passed through the windows, creating elongated shadows that reached toward the center of each room. The layout was simple but wrong in subtle ways. Hallways were a little longer than expected, doors slightly narrower, ceilings just high enough to feel unsettling. In the living room, the wallpaper bore faded floral patterns that distorted with the shifting light, the petals twisting into shapes that resembled faces half-formed. The air carried a faint hum, barely perceptible, but present in every corner, like a heartbeat too distant to identify. As the hours passed, the house felt increasingly alive. The temperature dipped without reason, then warmed abruptly as if exhaling. When they walked through rooms, the atmosphere behind them seemed to seal shut, leaving the sensation that something followed, pressing closely, just beyond the reach of perception. The forest outside loomed at every window, but even its presence felt muted, as though the house padded itself with a layer of separation from the world beyond. Night fell quickly, faster than it should have. The sun seemed to vanish behind the tree line in an unnaturally swift descent. Inside, the dim bulbs cast weak pools of amber light that failed to chase away the gloom. Shadows thickened in the corners, gathering like spilled ink. The air felt displaced, as if something else had taken up space in the rooms, shifting around them quietly. They tried to settle, exploring the home with hesitant curiosity. In the hallway, the walls bore faint markings, scratches layered over one another, rising and descending in a pattern that almost formed symbols. The edges of the marks were uneven, some deep and others shallow, as if created over years by unseen hands. The deeper grooves held traces of something darkened with age, resembling dried moss or something far less natural. In the bedroom upstairs, the ceiling bowed gently downward, creating a subtle dome shape that seemed intentional rather than warped by time. The wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing older layers beneath that bore different patterns entirely, geometric shapes and faded stripes that looked unfamiliar, like remnants from a place rather than an era. The room carried a weight to it, a pressure behind the eyes that made breathing feel slightly more difficult. Sometime after midnight, the house grew colder. The chill seeped through the floorboards and settled into the air, heavy enough to tighten muscles and slow movement. The faint hum that had filled the home earlier deepened into a low, pulsing vibration. It resonated through the walls and floors, creating a disorienting sensation as if the structure were breathing. Each pulse seemed to ripple through the rooms, bending the air and subtly shifting the shadows. Objects appeared slightly out of place. A chair positioned at an unfamiliar angle. A curtain that had been drawn now hanging half open. Small, almost insignificant changes that felt too deliberate to be accidents. The house seemed to observe from every corner, aware of their movements, adjusting itself as if communicating in a silent, spectral language. In the narrow upstairs hallway, the air thickened until visibility wavered. The walls seemed to stretch a fraction farther apart, then constrict again with a slow, rhythmic pulse. The light flickered, but not in the usual way. Instead of quick bursts, The illumination faded gradually and returned just as slowly, as though someone were dimming the world by hand. During the darkest moments of each fade, the hallway felt longer, extended unnaturally, as if the shadows had swollen into the physical space. They retreated to the bedroom, attempting to ignore the unfamiliar sensations. The bed felt too soft, almost sinking beneath them in a way that made them wonder if it had been stuffed with something damp. The air in the room thickened further, carrying the faint scent of something metallic buried beneath layers of dust and time. As the minutes stretched into uneasy silence, the walls seemed to close in by imperceptible degrees, narrowing the room's dimensions with each pulse of the house. Sleep hovered at the edges of their mind, but never fully arrived. Each time their eyes drifted shut, an instinctive jolt of dread forced them awake again. The shadows in the corners appeared deeper than before, as though something had gathered there, condensing into form. The wallpaper patterns shifted subtly, the floral images curling inward like closing eyes. Across the ceiling, a faint ripple passed, too quick to be certain, but undeniable. It traveled from one corner to the opposite, distorting the overhead light for a brief moment. The air beneath the ripple thickened, creating the sensation that something large had moved above the plaster surface, pushing its weight through layers of ceiling and darkness. Footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere within the house, but the direction remained impossible to determine. They weren't the heavy steps of a person. They were too soft, too irregular, almost as if something grazed the floor without fully touching it. The sound drifted from room to room in slow, deliberate movements, circling the upper floor. When it finally neared the bedroom door, the temperature plummeted. The pulsing hum deepened again, vibrating the floorboards with a steady rhythm. The door frame bent slightly inward, just enough to be noticeable, creating a warped outline that seemed to pulse along with the house. The darkness in the hallway thickened, becoming opaque, swallowing every trace of light. Something shifted within it, a presence that held its shape without revealing itself. As the first night stretched into its dreadful stillness, the realization crept in with icy clarity. The house was not haunted in the way stories described. There were no wandering spirits, no restless ghosts seeking release. The house itself was alive, aware, waiting, consuming the fear that seeped into its walls. And whatever moved in its depths had awakened because they had entered. The first night had only begun. Morning arrived without light, as though the sun had risen behind a wall of dense shadow. The forest outside stood unnervingly still, its branches stiff like frozen limbs. The air inside the house remained thick and unmoving, as if sealed beneath an invisible dome. Every breath carried the taste of dust and cold metal, lingering in the throat long after exhalation. The house did not release them from its weight. It only shifted, preparing for something else. The faint hum that had pulsed through the night now resonated deeper, spreading through the walls with slow, deliberate intensity. It felt less like a sound and more like a presence pressing against the body, moving beneath the skin like a second heartbeat. The wallpaper's floral patterns curled inward, displaying shapes that resembled hollow eyes watching from within the walls themselves. Even in full silence, the atmosphere vibrated with hidden motion. Downstairs, rooms appeared subtly altered. The living room seemed longer, stretching deeper into the shadows than memory allowed. The corners sharpened at strange angles, as though the house had rearranged itself during the night. Floorboards bowed inward, not as if collapsing, but bending toward something beneath them. Each step carried the sensation of something shifting below, retreating from contact, only to push upward again seconds later. In the kitchen, the ceiling bore new cracks forming a branching pattern like skeletal fingers reaching toward the floor. The windows had fogged from the inside despite the dry air. Through the haze, the forest looked farther away than it had the day before, as though the house were drifting into a deeper, unseen part of the land. The outside world appeared muted, almost reluctant to interact with anything happening within the walls. By midday, the light dimmed prematurely. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the floors in thin, trembling strands. They pulsed with the hum, contracting and expanding like living tendrils. The temperature dropped again, pressing cold air into the lungs like water sinking into the chest. The sense of being watched grew heavier, now unmistakable, as though countless unseen eyes had awakened throughout the structure. Upstairs, the hallway seemed to tilt slightly downward, leading toward the bedroom with unsettling insistence. The narrowing of the walls from the previous night had continued imperceptibly, now creating a tunnel-like corridor lined with warped wallpaper curling at the edges. The patterns on the walls undulated slowly, forming shifting shapes that echoed the outline of faces, some human, some twisted into unfamiliar configurations. Inside the bedroom, the ceiling sagged further, forming a shallow dome that dipped lower with each passing hour. The ripple seen the night before returned, but now it traveled more slowly, visibly distorting the air and causing a pressure that throbbed at the temples. Beneath the ripple, the plaster bulged slightly, as though something pressed downward from the other side, testing the boundary separating its world from theirs. The house grew restless as dusk approached. The hum deepened into a soft vibration that rattled the glass in the windows. The walls contracted and expanded with quiet, rhythmic motions, creating the illusion of breathing. The corners darkened until they resembled voids sinking into the floor. In those shadows, faint shapes formed, elongated outlines that hovered without moving, silently merging with the darkness around them. The forest outside continued to recede, its trees now barely visible through the distorted glass. The boundary between inside and outside blurred, the windows reflecting the interior rather than revealing the world beyond. It felt as though the house was drawing everything inward, pulling the landscape and its occupants into a single, enclosed space where escape no longer belonged to the concept of distance. Night returned with suffocating abruptness. The dim bulbs flickered in long, slow waves, casting distorted silhouettes across the walls. The shadows reacted to each flicker, swelling in anticipation. Footsteps echoed again, but now they came from inside the walls themselves. The movements were slow, dragging, as though something enormous shifted its weight behind the plaster. Each step caused the floorboards to tremble, sending vibrations up through the bed frame and into the air like warning signals. The house's breathing grew louder. Each inhale tightened the walls, pulling them inward. Each exhale released a cold draft that swept through the bedroom in heavy bursts. The wallpaper peeled further with every contraction, revealing older layers beneath, patterns that grew increasingly geometric, spirals and lines that created dizzying illusions. Some sections bore markings like tally marks carved through multiple generations, etched too deep into the wall to be accidental. The door frame warped inward again, bending more dramatically than the night before. The darkness in the hallway thickened into a tangible mass. Its surface quivered, rippling like liquid shadow. Shapes gathered within it, not fully formed, but recognizable in their intent. Limbs that bent at unnatural angles, torsos twisting in slow motions, faces half-shaped and half-dissolving into the murk. They hovered silently, waiting for the moment when the fluctuating boundary between darkness and form would allow passage. The ceiling above dipped another inch. The bulge in its center pulsated with the house's breath. Cracks spread outward in branching patterns, creeping across the plaster like veins. With each pulse, thin streams of dust drifted downward in steady trickles. The sensation of being enclosed from both above and below intensified until movement became difficult, as if the air had thickened to the density of water. The footsteps within the walls grew louder, circling the room in slow, deliberate loops. Every few moments, the walls would flex outward, suggesting something pushing from inside. The shapes in the hallway's darkness shifted closer, their forms becoming more defined, edges sharpening with a grotesque clarity. The hum deepened again, sinking into a frequency that resonated inside the chest, vibrating each heartbeat until it felt misaligned with the body. The shadows in the bedroom elongated, stretching toward the center of the room like reaching limbs. The air dimmed further, the bulbs fading with inhuman slowness. During each interval of darkness, the room felt smaller, tightening as though the walls had taken another step inward. The forest, once visible through the window, had vanished entirely, replaced by a murky reflection of the room itself, as if the house no longer acknowledged an outside world. The house began to pulse faster. The ceiling bulge throbbed with increasingly frantic rhythm. The shapes in the hallway leaned into the threshold, contours forming with dreadful clarity, Hollow sockets, elongated jaws, limbs tapering into thin, tapering points. They hovered in anticipation, synchronized with the house's breath as though part of its design. The realization settled with cold certainty. The house was not merely haunted. It was a living entity, fed by the presence of those inside. Their fear nourished it, strengthened it, allowed it to reshape itself around them. The first night had awakened it. The second night prepared it. And what waited beyond that moment was not escape, but transformation. The structure was no longer a home. It was a body, and they were no longer guests. They were becoming part of it. The house still stands, quiet behind the trees, waiting for anyone curious or desperate enough to enter. Those who approach swear they hear breathing from within, steady and patient. What happened inside remains sealed in its walls, stitched into every floorboard and shadow. If you ever pass a house that feels alive, trust your instincts and keep walking. And if you want to hear the rest of the horrors waiting inside, stay close. More stories await.